They trained him to fight for freedom, but they never planned to honor him for it. When Vernon Baker stepped onto the battlefield in World War II, he carried the same rifle, the same fear, and the same courage as any other American soldier. What he did not carry was the promise of recognition. In an era when the color of a man's skin mattered more than the depth of his bravery, heroism was quietly filtered through prejudice. They trained him to fight for freedom, but they never planned to honor him for it. When Vernon Baker stepped onto the battlefield in World War II, he carried the same rifle, the same fear, and the same courage as any other American soldier. What he did not carry was the promise of recognition. In an era when the color of a man's skin mattered more than the depth of his bravery, heroism was quietly filtered through prejudice. Under a sky torn apart by gunfire in the mountains of Italy, Baker ran toward danger, while others were pinned down. He advanced alone, knowing every step could be his last, knowing history might never remember his name. Bullets did not stop him. Fear did not stop him. Only racism did. When the war ended and medals were handed out, his courage was downgraded, his sacrifice minimized, and his story buried. For decades, America celebrated victory without mentioning the men it chose to ignore. Vernon Baker returned home a hero without a headline, a warrior without applause. This is not just a story about war. It is a story about silence, about injustice, and about a nation that asked everything from a man then refused to say thank you. Under a sky torn apart by gunfire in the mountains of Italy, Baker ran toward danger, while others were pinned down. He advanced alone, knowing every step could be his last, knowing history might never remember his name. Bullets did not stop him. Fear did not stop him. Only racism did. When the war ended and medals were handed out, his courage was downgraded, his sacrifice minimized, and his story buried. For decades, America celebrated victory without mentioning the men it chose to ignore. Vernon Baker returned home a hero without a headline, a warrior without applause. This is not just a story about war. It is a story about silence, about injustice, and about a nation that asked everything from a man then refused to say thank you. He was trained to fight for a country that did not yet see him as equal. And when Vernon Baker put on the uniform of the United States Army, he carried both hope and a quiet understanding of the limits placed on men who looked like him. Born in 1919 in Wyoming, Baker grew up in an America divided by race. In America where black citizens were expected to serve, but not to be celebrated. When World War II erupted, he volunteered anyway, believing that courage on the battlefield might finally force the nation to confront its own contradictions. The U.S. Army he entered was segregated by law and custom, separating black soldiers into their own units under white officers. Many commanders believed African American troops were unfit for combat, assigning them labor roles far from the front lines. Vernon Baker refused to accept that fate, pushing himself through training and earning a place in the 92nd Infantry Division, known as the Buffalo Soldiers. It was one of the few black combat divisions allowed to fight in Europe, though even there they were doubted and underestimated. In early 1945, as Allied forces pushed through Italy, Baker's unit faced some of the most fortified German positions in the region. The terrain was brutal, with mountains, minefields, and heavily entrenched enemy forces waiting above. On February 5th, near Caselle Ginofi, Baker's company was ordered to assault a German stronghold that had already repelled multiple attacks. It was a mission many believed was close to suicidal. As the attack began, German machine gun fire ripped through the advancing troops, pinning them down in open ground. One by one, soldiers were wounded or forced to retreat, but Baker kept moving forward under constant fire. With grenades in his rifle, he silenced one machine gun nest, then another, clearing a path where none had existed moments before. Each move was a decision that could have ended his life instantly, yet he advanced without hesitation. At one point, Baker found himself alone, separated from his unit by chaos and smoke. Rather than fall back, he continued the assault, destroying enemy positions that threatened his fellow soldiers. He killed or wounded multiple German troops and forced others to surrender, breaking the backbone of the defensive line. His actions directly saved lives and turned the tide of the battle, allowing his unit to advance and secure the objective. By the end of the day, Vernon Baker had done what military doctrine called extraordinary heroism. White officers who witnessed the fight submitted reports, recommending him for the Medal of Honor, the nation's highest military award. On paper, his bravery was undeniable. his actions matching or exceeding those of many who had already received the medal. But paper does not exist in a vacuum, especially in a country shaped by racial prejudice. Instead of the Medal of Honor, Baker received the Distinguished Service Cross, the Army's second highest award. At the time, this downgrade was common for black soldiers, even when their heroism matched that of white recipients. The pattern was quiet but consistent, bravery acknowledged just enough to appear fair, yet never enough to challenge the racial hierarchy of the era. Vernon Baker returned home a hero, in fact, but not in the history books. After the war, Baker left the Army and tried to build a civilian life, carrying memories of combat that never fully faded. Like many veterans, he struggled with the silence that followed the war, but his silence carried an extra weight. He knew what he had done, and he knew how his country had responded. The nation moved on, celebrating victory while ignoring the men whose service complicated the narrative of equality. Decades passed, and the story of Vernon Baker remained largely unknown outside of military circles. Meanwhile, historians began uncovering evidence that racial bias had systematically denied black soldiers the recognition they deserved during World War II. Studies revealed that not a single African American had received the Medal of Honor during the war, despite thousands serving in combat roles. The absence was not accidental. It was deliberate. In the 1990s, a Department of Defense review confirmed what many had long suspected. Racial discrimination had influenced award decisions during World War II, leading to unjust denials of the Medal of Honor. Vernon Baker's name resurfaced as one of the most glaring examples. Survivors, historians, and advocates pushed for correction, arguing that justice delayed was still justice worth pursuing. In 1997, more than 50 years after the battle in Italy, President Bill Clinton awarded Vernon Baker the Medal of Honor in a White House ceremony. Baker stood among 6 other African-American veterans whose bravery had finally been acknowledged. When Clint had placed the medal around his neck, it was not just an honor for Baker, but an admission of national failure. America was correcting a record it had intentionally distorted. Baker accepted the medal with humility, saying he received it on behalf of all the black soldiers who had served and been forgotten. His words reflected a lifetime of understanding that his story was never just about one man. It was about a system that demanded loyalty from those it marginalized and courage from those it refused to fully honor. The medal shone brightly, but it could not erase decades of silence. Vernon Baker lived to see his story recognized, but many others did not. Countless black soldiers returned from World War II to segregation, discrimination, and obscurity. Their heroism buried beneath a nation unwilling to confront its own prejudice. Their bravery existed, regardless of medals, regardless of recognition. History simply chose not to look. This is why Vernon Baker's story matters today, not only as a tale of wartime courage, but as a mirror held up to America. It forces us to ask uncomfortable questions about who is remembered, who is celebrated, and who is erased. Heroism does not change based on skin color, but recognition often does. And until those truths are acknowledged, history remains incomplete. He was a war hero the moment he charged into enemy fire, long before a medal confirmed it. Racism may have written him out of history for half a century, but it could not erase the facts of his courage. Vernon Baker fought for a country that was not ready to honor him, and in doing so, he exposed both the greatness and the flaws of the nation he served. His story is not just about the past. It is a warning and a reminder for the future.